All right, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Dennis Hancock. I get to be the Center Director at the U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center. We are a USDA ARS research center located here in Madison. We also have a research unit located up in Marshfield as well. We have a dairy farm located outside of Prairie du Sac where we do our research. And we are also glad to be the partners here with World Dairy Expo to be able to bring these seminars together. And this afternoon's presentation is one that is always a highlight for our week of events, is our producer spotlight. And this year is one that I've been really looking forward to for a while, because I've known Kendall and his wife, especially Kendall, I've seen in various meetings over the years. And I was just telling you, I was looking back at some old photos of these events from years gone by when we were in the old building, and seeing pictures of him actually in those pictures as well. So anyway, with no further ado, I am really excited to see Kendall share some of this information. He opened up the farm doors for me the other day. I went down, I guess it was about 6 or 8 weeks ago, spent some time with him and his wife and toured around. Some really interesting things. So Kendall, thanks for coming and looking forward to your talk.
Okay, thank you very much. What we're seeing, what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is telling you what I've learned in the last 25 years of doing baleage, what we're doing, and a little bit why we're doing it, and some of the reasoning behind it. Showing here that we're kind of in the northwest corner of Illinois, and I've been doing the baleage since 1997. And at that time, it was in its infancy stage. There was not a lot of people that knew what baleage even was. And if I asked the dairy producer if he wanted to try some baleage, and he said, well, what's that? So I'd have to explain it to him. Okay, when I get ready to seed, there are several things I want to look at on that seed bed and getting the seed bed prepared. Now, a year ahead of time, before seeding the alfalfa, I want to add ag line to bring the pH up to about a 7 pH. That way it has time for that lime to interact with the soil and bring the pH up, because that is so critical on seeding alfalfa to have a pH of 6, 9, or 7, so you get a good germination and stand. I usually follow it with corn, or follow the alfalfa with corn, so then that fall I use a disc ripper. And I am using a chopping head on my corn head, and found that that helps cut the residue up a little more, quite a bit more actually, and I have less residue getting picked up in the first cutting of hay. So that's been a plus. So I use a disc ripper, then in the spring I'll do one pass with a field cultivator, and then a pass with a cultimulcher with the teeth down. And that allows me to help level the seed bed, kill any germinating weeds that are there, dry the soil if necessary, but most importantly, it helps firm up the seed bed. That's really critical on getting a good germination. Now here it's showing you walk out on the seed bed, and if your shoe print sinks in about 3/8 of an inch, or the depth of your sole, you have a firm enough seed bed. If you go in deeper than that, you need to hit it again, or the first time, with a cultimulcher to get that seed bed firmed up. You've got to remember, you've got really fine seed here, and it's easy to bury it too deep. So a firm seed bed is really important. I'll take and broadcast the seed. I'm seeding 20 pounds of treated seed per acre. Currently, I'm using the 377 WL Harv Extra Roundup Ready Low Lignin. I was anxious to try the low lignin and see how that would help or work in my operation. And the only way you can get it right now is with the Roundup Ready characteristic. What I have found, as aggressive as I am in my cutting schedule, the low lignin doesn't always give me much of an advantage. I have had times, 3 times I've checked where a field close by cut about the same time within a day, that conventional alfalfa has had lower lignin than the Roundup Ready low lignin. But then there's been like the next cutting where the low lignin was actually a little bit lower. So they're pretty close. Where the low lignin for me really makes a difference if I get caught with a rain delay and have to wait 3, 4, 5, 7 days, why then that helps extend that harvest window to keep the lignin level low. In conventional alfalfa, I really like the WL365. What I'm looking for in both, or any of them, but especially those two, the 365 has a 4.9 fall dormancy rating. So that tells you it's going to break dormancy quicker in the spring, grow faster after each cutting, and you get more regrowth in the fall. And then it has a 1.1 winter hardiness, which is extremely good. It's very, very winter hardy. I'll fertilize, I'll put on half of it after my first cutting and then half after my August cutting. That allows me in my August cutting, if I'm having a poor production year, I can cut back a little bit if I feel I need to, or a really good year of production, I can add a little bit. And I'm looking to put on some phosphate and potash, but after first cutting, I also put on some boron and sulfur. That's when I want to put on those two elements so that they're through the summer. And then I'll mix in either some Super Cal SO4 or some Pel Lime to help counteract some of the sulfur and trying to keep the pH up. So after I get the broadcasting done, I'll roll it with a cotomulcher with the teeth up. I used to only do it once, and I have found through observation, like the one trip would turn and there'd be a spot in the headlands where we were hitting it twice anyway, and I could always see better germination there. So now I am rolling the whole field twice with the cotomulcher, and I do see a better stand. I've rented it out to other people, and they've done the same thing, and they agree with me that we do have a better stand. And then whether it's Roundup or conventional, then I spray as needed to keep the weeds under control. Scouting is very important. You've got to keep track not only of what issues you have with weeds, but bugs are very, very important. And I'm looking to see what the crown count is, but also the stem count. Stem count tells you a lot. If you get 50 or more stems per square foot, you've got a good solid stand. If you get 45 to 50, you need to evaluate, is this something I need to keep for another year or not? And if you get 40 or below, you definitely need to consider tearing it up then the following year. Looking for diseases, any bugs that may need to be controlled. Thank goodness the leaf hoppers aren't that big, or they would just devastate everything in their path. But they can be very destructive. Here you can see the yellow leaf hopper burn that it's called. And once you see yellowing on the plant, that plant is stunted. You're going to lose quality because it's not growing properly. And it not only stunts the plant for that cutting, it stunts it for that year, and it stunts it for the rest of its life. So it's very, very important to keep leaf hoppers under control and not have issues. We had a field that we sprayed. It was long, part of the field was along a creek with a lot of trees, and we did it aerial. Because of the temperature inversion, the cool creek and the trees and everything, this plane, even though he flew low, he could not get the spray in the first 80 feet of the edge of the field. We never thought about it, but we found afterwards that where the spray landed and where it didn't was a huge difference, and those two plants were only 8 feet apart. Yeah, huge, huge difference. And there again, illustrates how stunted those plants were after that, and even after we cut it, you could tell where the plane didn't reach the first time, there was still some stunted growth there. So keeping ahead of the potato leafhopper is very, very important. On harvesting, I harvest very aggressively. I want to do first cut, I'll start in the spring, late vegetative, or very, very early bud stage, because I want to try and have all my fields done at that early bud stage. just checking the plant for growth. Definitely no flowers out there. Now there's a trade-off by cutting that aggressively. I'm selling hay commercially. I'm looking at quality versus quantity. I have several customers that have standing orders from now until I quit making hay of some first cutting hay, because they know quality is a huge difference to the animals, whether it's dairy cows or dairy goats. It makes a big difference. They do a lot better, so they're looking for quality. Also, I want to get wrapping. If I can be more aggressive, I'm not going to have as big a stem to deal with, and by doing it as baleage, they're going to be a softer stem, so I'm not having issues with the stems poking through the plastic and causing holes. So there again, I'm looking for high quality, and high quality is always sellable. I always run out of that every year. Later cuts, I'm looking to cut at late bud stage, and one time during the summer, because of a rain delay or something, I'll let it go to flower to let the plant kind of catch up a little bit, build root reserves, and catch its breath and catch up with me. So here's some samples of that. I want to have my summer cuts done by the 1st or 2nd of September. That way the plant has plenty of time to build root reserves and get ready for freeze and going dormant. I'll do a dormant cut every year. It's usually about the mid or late November when I do it. I'm watching the temperature. 26 degrees for 3 or 4 hours, we'll get it dormant. 24 degrees for 5 minutes, we'll do it. And then I also cut a longer stem. I'll cut about a 5-inch stubble, so then what's left we'll take and catch some snow to help insulate. Swath size, I lay it out wide. You're going to quicker dry down, excuse me, and minimize the plant respiration. Here it's showing 2 different cutters. Yeah, it's out west, but here's one laid out wide and one narrow, and look at the difference in the solar energy captured, and that's going to affect how fast that plant dries down. You need to plan ahead on your cuttings. At first, when I got into baleage, I thought, well, I just use it as kind of a backup plan. And I have learned that it just doesn't work. If you use it as a backup plan, you cut it and think, well, I'll see if it dries down. If it doesn't, then I'll do baleage. You're setting yourself up for failure because it's going to be too dry. So when the day or two before you cut it, look at the weather, have the mindset, okay, the weather's marginal, I'm going to do baleage, and go into it with the mindset of doing baleage. And that's especially important, like if you don't have a wrapper, then you're going to have to line somebody up with a wrapper ahead of time and get all that coordinated, thank you, so that you can get it wrapped on time. Here we're out in the field getting it cut laid out wide. And a wet feed ends in AGE, corn silage, haylage, baleage. There's a couple subcategories, foliage or garbage. So if you do it wrong, you're going to have problems. Once you cut it, the feed value is going to go downhill from there. Once you cut it, all you're doing, whether it's dry hay, haylage, baleage, all you're doing is moisture management from that point on. So the idea is to capture as much of that feed value as you can by minimizing plant respiration, and you also have to consider the conditions of humidity, rain, cloudy days, etc. When I'm raking, I'm using rotary rakes and a merger. Basket rakes can work, but they're not designed to handle a wet feed. There's just too much weight there, and I was using them initially, but I had to have a spare drive shaft for each rake because I was, especially with first cutting, I was going to break that drive shaft because of trying to handle all the extra weight. With the rotary rakes and merger, we'll put up to 4 windrows together. That helps slow down the drying so it doesn't get too dry before I can get to it with the baler. And then that also helps by having 4 together, it speeds up the baling process for me. Here we're showing a left-hand rake and the merger out in the field, getting the windrows put together. Here's the merger. What we're doing here, this is hitting number 1, putting it over on top of number 2. That's doing number 4 on top of number 3. Then the center delivery rake will come along and put it all together into one windrow. Okay, target moisture. I like to see somewhere between 44 and 58%. You can go up to 60 or 62, but you'll want to stay below 65. You can get down to 40 and be okay, but I figure 40 is kind of the borderline on the bottom end. If you get below that, you don't have enough moisture for fermentation to take place completely. It will ferment a little bit, but even my nose versus a cow's, which is more sensitive, I can tell a difference between 36 and 45% moisture because of the difference in the fermentation. Think of it this way. A diesel engine that goes out, a tractor that goes out to plow, if the fuel filter's plugged, it won't plow. It'll let you get back home to change the fuel filter. Well, that diesel fuel to the tractor is power. The moisture to fermentation is the power to get it fermented properly, to produce enough lactic and acetic acid to lower the pH, to stop respiration, and to stop mold growth. If you get over 65%, you can get Clostridia, or no, butyric acid formation, and that'll make it sour. I've been there and done that. But that'll make it sour and the animals will want to reject it. When you're baling, you want to get the bales as dense as possible, trying to squeeze out as much air as possible. That is so important in wet forage making. There's even formulas out there, like on a pit silo, that for so many tons an hour coming in, you have to have so many pounds of packing capacity. Well, it's kind of very much the same thing with the baler. You've got to squeeze the air out of that bale. I'm using a 440 twine. I used to use a 380, which is a little smaller, but I found with the 440, I can pack them just a little bit tighter and have the twine hold up to it and not be breaking on me. I'm currently using, just keeping track of my notes here. Right now, I do put an inoculant on. I'm currently using Silo King from Agri King. I'm using the dry product that they have. And the reason I like the dry product is I can pull into the field, start baling, turn the applicator on. And if I have to add more to the applicator, I can. When I'm done, I shut the applicator off, so I know I've got enough to cover the field. If you mix up a batch of liquid, do you have enough or too much? If you have too much and it goes bad on you and you lose it, if you don't have enough and you got 5 ton left, are you going to mix up a little bit more or bale without it? I like a good inoculant for the combination of bacteria, antioxidant, and enzymes. That's going to encourage good acid production, lower the pH as quick as possible. The enzymes are going to help break down the fiber. All in all, it's going to make it more digestible, more palatable, and simply put, it works. And also, the Silo King has some elements that will help stop or prevent mold and yeast formation. So that's another plus to it. A good inoculant will speed up the fermentation process. Another way to look at it, if you set a 2.5 gallon jug here on the floor, and you're going to fill it with a 5 gallon pail. It's kind of sloppy, but you will get the job done eventually. But if you put a funnel on that, you'll get it done a lot quicker, a lot more efficient. You also have to watch the bacterial bugs that are in some of these products. You want the good bugs, will simply put, for better fermentation. You want a fast drop in the pH, which will minimize dry matter loss and keep the heating element very low if there is any at all. Bad bugs are slow per fermentation, a slow pH drop, large dry matter loss, and high heating of the forage which consumes dry matter. One product, the bacterial bugs will multiply and double in 25 minutes. There's another product where it takes them 60 hours to double in the number of bugs that are out there. So which one do you want working for you, and how hard do you want it to work? There's a big difference here. Here was a good one. I was talking to a salesman years ago, and I just played tourist, and I was listening to his speech, and he rattled on about his product, and all of a sudden he said something about the non-viable bacteria. I said, whoa, wait a minute. You just said non-viable, right? Oh, yeah. Do you realize what you just said? That means the bugs are dead. That's like putting a dead bull out in the heifer pasture. Nothing's going to happen. Okay, just showing some pictures here of what we're doing. We get the bales dropped out in the field, scattered out a little bit, run around with a loader and get them picked up and loaded. We like to take them either to the edge of the field or a storage site where we're going to wrap them. Got one wagon here headed for the barn site, another one getting ready to load up. Here's a pair of wagons that are kind of unique. They're all aluminum. I had a couple steel wagons that I liked because there was very little maintenance or zero to the deck. And a neighbor asked me if I wanted to buy a flatbed semi-trailer. Okay, I'll come look at it. Well, here's what I found, and you're seeing it right there. There's a 43-foot all aluminum semi-trailer. I looked at it a little bit, and joister here and here. Yeah, I'll take it. So I literally sawed it in half and made 2 hay racks out of it. Best thing I ever did. You can put on any number of bales you want. It'll hold it. I got 12-ton gears under it, and they're lightweight, and they hold up. They do a nice job. Okay, sampling. Very important. I want to sample before I wrap it, because I don't want to come back and poke holes in the plastic when I'm wrapping, or after I'm wrapped, because that just invites an infiltration of air. So everybody knows that my samples that I show them on paper are a fresh sample. It's going to ferment. It's going to get a little bit better, but here's what the fresh sample is. And out of each wagon load that comes in, depending how many bales we expect, we only think it's a small field and short cutting, 80 bales, we'll sample just about every bale. If we think we might have 300 bales, we'll sample a quarter or 30% of them. I'm trying to get a representative sample of bales from the whole field so that I get a good representative sample out of the field, so that when somebody says, I want some of this, they get a load, well, I want the rest of that, they know it's going to be pretty consistent delivered to them. Here's what we're using for sampling. I have to buy the tubes. I get those from NASCO, but I've developed a plastic push rod, a drive ends that are very stout, a 3/8 and ½ inch drive. They have flat spots on, so the power drill will grab a hold of them. And then we've developed a scalloped forage cutting tip that will not plug up with a wet feed. And they are super, super sharp. I had to develop the plastic push out to clean it out of the thing there, the tube, because the wood one I was using, and I put on a new tip one time, I pushed in and it caught the grain of the wood, cut the cutting stick right in half. So one, it was that sharp, but two, that told me I got to come up with something different. Now we've got one of these that we use on for ourselves, been using it 4 or 5 years. It's all scarred up. It's pulled thousands of samples, but it's still in perfectly good shape. And if anybody's interested in those, I do have some with me for sale. Just showing here the whole outfit and the right angle drill that we're using to pull our samples with. Close up here, we do have to modify the tube so we can get a pin through there like that. What I found, that having 2 points of contact with that tube, the tube lasts a lot longer, and the push-in pin that originally came on a different drive end, it gets dirt in it, or my big thumb, I couldn't get it pushed in far enough and get it to release, and I figured there had to be something better. And this has proved to be something better. So it's really important that I get a representative sample of the field, the bales, the number sampled, and I keep it in a bucket with the lid on. out of the sun so that I know I'm not skewing the sample by having it dry more than it should. That keeps everybody happy. The buyer knows he's getting a good feed selection, and then it helps me to price the feed accurately. Okay, on wrapping, I want to be done wrapping within 3 hours of baling. That's really important because once that bale is baled up, that plant can't respire or cool down, so you're going to start getting bacterial action and it will start heating. Originally when I just had one wrapper, I wouldn't get so far ahead of the baler, the wrapper, but what I'd shut the baler off so they could catch up. It was hard to do that, but I knew that was important. Once in a while we have to wrap out in the field because it's just too wet to be out there with the wagons hauling it in. So if I have to wrap and drop out in the field, then we add 2 extra layers of plastic. I'm doing 8 layers, and I don't recommend doing any less than that because it helps the integrity of that plastic, and that's really important. Once you spend all the time and money and effort to get a $100 bale made, don't skimp on 80 cents worth of plastic and try 6 layers versus 8. It's not worth it. Spend a little bit extra, get a good quality plastic, and put on 8 layers. There's huge differences in the different kinds of plastic that are out there. This is one example where you definitely get what you spend, what you pay for. Now there's some variants, there's ranges, yes, but get a good quality plastic. We're using 2 individual wrappers, and that way we can keep up with the baler. And one thing too to watch when you're shopping for plastic is not just how thick or tough it is. Toughness is more important than how thick it is. Most of it's 1 mil. Some is 1.5 mil, and they say, well, that's better. Well, it's thicker. That doesn't make it better. If you compare an inch thick board of oak and an inch thick board of balsa, they're not the same. 1.5 inches of balsa still doesn't equal 1 inch of oak. Okay, here we got two lines, both wrappers running, and it keeps the guy in the skid loader hopping pretty fast, but we have found that we can have a continuous operation that way and keep up with the baler. Here he is loading off the wagon. We developed and made a second wrapper, and we extended it a lot right here, about 18 inches. That way he can pull up to the wagon and still reach across to grab those bales instead of having to drive around and unload or push them over. It saves a huge amount of time. And here again, another shot of where we're pulling samples. Storage, you need a good area for drainage. Up by the buildings or up by the road, that helps to some degree discourage coons or deer. Once in a while I have a problem with coons, and then I get a little bit upset and start doing some trapping, and I get even as best I can. Fortunately, I've never had a deer problem. I have heard mainly deer problems with like oatleage. There's that aroma there, and that really does attract the deer. With my hay, maybe once or twice over 25 years, but very rare. Here it shows the bales being stacked up. Very important to get them labeled. My system is that's field 8, first crop, second half the field. For some reason we had to do an 811 and an 812, whatever the circumstances were. But now I know that sample, somebody says, well, I want some of that, 812 or 811. I know exactly what it is and where it is and where to find it. Very important to feed the mice. We've got a tile flag here. We know that somewhere down this row is a bait station. So when partway, about 3 times during the summer, we'll have to go and check bait stations to make sure we got plenty of bait in there. Before I was baiting and feeding the mice, I would have a lot of problems with holes. There would be lots of mice runs, and still is underneath the bottom bale. But their anatomy is they can't twist around and go up. So they crawl up to the pen house or the second layer, get between the bales, dig a hole and open it up and cause problems. But with the bait stations out there, during the year, I might find 5 or 12 bales out of 3 or 4,000. So it just about eliminated the problem. Okay, quick example. Let's see, that's this year's stuff. Just showing what I'm looking for. Looking the moisture, crude protein. Now here's another one where we highlighted where I'm looking for the moisture, crude, only 29%. IVDMD, which is in vitro dry matter digestibility. That's kind of off the chart. Then I'm looking at the NDFD30, and then RFV and RFQ. I still have quite a few people asking for that number too, but they're learning to ask for this one also. So I take those numbers in, and that'll help me establish a price. And we've got a little larger example, easier to read, of a price chart here. I price it all as though it was dry hay. Everybody's used to buying dry hay at 15%. So as this example, that's $240 a ton for dry hay, and if it was 50% moisture, it's $141 a ton as is. Or 55 moisture, it's $127 a ton as is. Still 0.1412 per pound of dry matter. The dry matter is the same price all the way across. The only difference here is the amount of moisture. Okay, then I come up with my inventory sheet. I list the IVDMD in descending order, and I have the other numbers there, the pricing and page numbers. So if somebody says, give me more information, I can go back to the page and I'll get a price list there and take orders accordingly. But then I've got an inventory list to go with. Okay, reasons I went to all Baleage. It's a lot easier, it's a lot more fun. Okay, Sunday night, weather forecast gives you, we got dry weather all week, sunshine, a little bit of wind, low humidity. Okay, let's go cut hay and make some dry hay. Reality is about mid-afternoon the next day, guess what's going to happen? We lose the sunshine and in comes a storm. And there's a pickup. That was a scenario where we just knew that we were going to do baleage because I didn't trust the weatherman. And so we were doing baleage. I think we were down to the last wagon load or two. We saw that storm coming. We got everything put away and it rained. And I just slept comfortably that night because I knew I had nothing getting wet. Okay, so another reason, you can get higher quality with baleage. It's a near perfect feed when you make it right. You've got all the advantages of long stems to promote cud chewing. You've got all the benefit of fermentation, which starts the digestive process, and baleage just trips the animal's trigger like a mouse to a cat. They want to eat it, not because they're hungry, but because they're not full. With a narrow harvest window, you can do it in, most of the time I'm cutting one day, baling the next, once in a while the third day, but you can get off the field so much quicker, 2 to 3 days. It's not as hard on the regrowth, because regrowth, I've kind of forgotten, but I think you're losing about 4 or 5% a day on regrowth that you run it down. So somebody that leaves them out there for a week or 10 days, they're losing an awful lot of yield potential. And then many times, because you can stay on harvest schedule and get on and off the field, you can get an extra cutting in there pretty easy. Normally I figure I can get, during the summer, 5 cuttings, then add a cutting for my fall dormant, so I can get 6 a year. There's been 2 years because of a drought, doesn't sound right, but because the plant was dry, dehydrated, it didn't want to grow very tall, but it gets so high, plant's sole purpose is to go to seed, so it'd start to flower, so I cut it. And that was like at 20 or 21 days. So I squeezed in an extra cutting those 2 years. So I actually did 7 cuttings in, 6 during the summer. Another advantage of bale, you store it outside. 3,000 or 4,000 bales, that takes an awful big shed. Don't have to tarp it. You can haul it in the rain. You can load it in the rain. A lot less stress. But like I mentioned earlier, Once you cut it, all you're doing is managing the moisture. Nothing is going to overcome poor management. It's critical to keep the dirt out. Clostridia bacteria that's on the dirt. I mentioned earlier that we're raking and merging. Don't use a wheel rake. Wheel rakes drive on the ground. They're going to work more dirt into the feed. It's going to tend to stick more. Dirt will stick to anything, even the side of your pickup truck. But it'll especially stick to a wet feed. That Clostridia bacteria then has a perfect environment to grow, and that's going to cause trouble. Now, I'm not going to tell you it's going to not work at all. Somebody's going to go out and try it, and it'll work this time. That's like walking across a pond on thin ice. It'll work this time, maybe the next. But your level of comfort is getting pretty low, and at one point in time, it will fail you. I had a guy from Northeast Iowa call me late one August. I'm done raking hay. What happened, Jerry? He ruined his whole second cutting because all the elements were exactly wrong. And when he got ready to feed it, opened up a bale, it was completely garbage. So critical to get the dirt out during baling, wrapping, and keep it out during storage and keep the air out. Okay, I like the 3x3 mid-size square bales, individually wrapped. They're easy, safe for transporting. Most customers' skid loaders can handle that size and weight of bale. And they can be, I've got several Amish customers. We're unloading the truck with a neighbor's skid loader, and we'll set one on their little four-wheel wagon that's supposed to haul 1,000 pounds, and its tires get flat. But they'll haul it in and pull it up in front of the cows and dump it over right there in front of the stanchions, so it's really handy for them to feed. So it's easy for them to move the bales around. If you don't have a TMR, the individual flakes are easy to feed, and it's easy to monitor the feed out rate because you know there's about 22 flakes per bale. It weighs this much, so you know about how much each flake weighs and what you're doing. Here we're getting some loaded on the truck. Normally I don't go 3 high. This picture stumped me for a little while, and then it dawned on me I was taking some baleage and a load of straw. So I knew I could put the weight on the front, and I'm going to have less weight on the back, and then I'd be okay overall on my weight. I do take the bale squeezer whenever it's necessary, because not everybody has it. There's been a few people that have had a bale squeezer, and I take mine, either I forgot or whatever the reason, and they use this one a while, and they say, I really like that one. So we've sold some bale squeezers. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of my operation. Any questions? Yes?
Do you do risk management anyway?
Risk management?
As far as drought or damage from rodents or just risk management?
Okay, the question is, do I do risk management? I'm trying to take care of the crop as far as weeds, insects, so I raise a good, healthy crop. When I get it wrapped, I want to get it wrapped as fast as possible to protect as many nutrients in that crop as possible. When we're storing, we control the mice to try and keep it as good as possible. And then when we're loading it out and hauling, we're watching for holes in case we miss something, or if we happen to snag one, I'll mark it, that bale gets fed first. So does that answer your question?
Just insurance of sorts. Do you purchase any insurance on forage?
No. You can't, as far as I know, you can't get insurance for forage. You can get hail insurance, but that's about it. And there is some rain insurance available through a couple companies. Any other questions? Come on, I couldn't have answered them all. Yes?
Kendall, I saw the picture you sampled when your hay was dry before you wrapped it. What differences do the sample say after?
I didn't quite, there's enough background noise.
What would the sample look? How would the sample be different if you sample it after it fermented?
The fermentation process usually raises the lab analysis or the availability of the nutrients because, like I say, fermentation starts the digestive process, which makes the nutrients that are there more readily available. And I have, years ago when I was still doing dry hay, somebody wanted a few bales of dry hay, so I'd cut 80-acre field. I'd do the outside part of it as baleage, the inside part as dry hay. And yeah, there can be some field variations or whatever, but each time, big difference in the lab analysis between the dry hay and the baleage because you have less leaf loss. 65% of the feed value is in the leaves. And you could see the difference in wheel traffic on the inside part because there was more regrowth in the stubble that initially you don't see, but that extra 3-4 days is huge. Any other questions? Well, thanks for your time. If you have any more, come on up and see me.